Hello, everybody. It's Daryl T. Dixon, and welcome back to another edition, a pre-recorded edition of the Daily Daryl Discussions. And today I have some good friends of mine along, some legal experts, and I'm gonna let them introduce themselves in a minute. One is Nick Rishwain, and the other is Alicia Kinchlow. And we're going to talk today about the Stormy Daniels versus Donald Trump lawsuit, which has made the news all week. It's been on the talk shows every night and the news channels. And we're going to give a couple legal perspectives today because there's really two cases that we're talking about. And so without any further ado, I'm going to let our partners introduce themselves and go ahead, take it away.
Alicia, please.
Thank
Ladies
you.
first.
My name is Alicia Kinchlow. I'm an attorney practicing out of primarily the Philadelphia region. My practice is dedicated to family and business law. I'm also a business consultant and coach, and I also have a podcast called The Growth Goal, which I talk to business owners about how to grow their businesses. And I'm happy to be here with you guys today talking about this. It's very interesting.
Do you want to tell everybody what your podcast is in case they want to download it?
Sure. The podcast is called The Growth Goal, so you can find it on iTunes and Spotify, all those places. It's called The Growth Goal. Very easy.
And there's I believe there's a Twitter account for The Growth Goal, right? At
There is.
The Growth Goal?
Correct.
Yep.
At The Growth Goal, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I'm Nick Rishwain. I'm Vice President, Client Relations and Development at experts.com. And we're expert witness marketing platform. And so when we get these big civil litigation types and criminal cases as well, we help attorneys to locate and retain the experts that are needed to address the issues. I don't know that this case will have that, but there are some interesting aspects of it that I think we can discuss, that especially in the damages section of the defamation case, that would be really interesting. Anyway, you can find me at experts.com, and you can find me on Twitter at experts.comvp. And I'm happy to be here talking with a couple of great legal minds.
All right, great, guys. I think maybe we start with the attorneys, and we know we have Michael Avenatti on the plaintiff side for Stormy Daniels. And if you don't know who this guy is, and you haven't seen his face this week, you had to have been under a rock because he's been on every Today Show, Good Morning America, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. I mean, he is on there more than the regular scheduled hosts, and so he's been giving all these opinions. The Trump team, defense team, is just going to now start being unveiled, and we may have a couple of names for you as there is some breaking news in this. So, Michael Avenatti, guys, I just throw it out to y'all. It's very interesting to me, the attack he has taken with this, because he has gone out and basically taken his case, a civil lawsuit against the President of the United States, and he has publicized it everywhere. So I think it's just interesting. You don't normally see attorneys going on social media and on network news and all these other things when a lawsuit is so young. So I was first going to get your all's, how do you feel about his presence on the national news, and how do you feel about his presence on social media and the way he's basically litigating this case in the great wide open?
Alicia, you're the other practicing lawyer in this group.
I think
please answer.
Sure. I think it's an interesting approach. I think especially when we're talking about a non-disclosure agreement, and to be so public about it and to be so aggressive about it. A part of me feels that dealing with the type of person that Mr. Cohen is supposed to be, come from some of the reports I've read, the type of fixer he is supposed to be, the way that his work is, the level is for the Trump organization and Mr. Trump himself. I think maybe he feels that this is the type of attorney he needs to be, that he has to be more aggressive. He cannot be passive, or he will not be taken seriously. But it does give me some cause for concern when you have a situation where your client is signing a non-disclosure agreement and you're being so public about it. And the repercussions, if she is found to be bound by this agreement, is that there is $1 million per breach, and even causing that breach to occur. That gives me some concerns. But I understand his need to be aggressive. The style it's interesting. I mean, it definitely makes for good television.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I feel the same. I feel, and as I guess I can say a lot of things because I don't have a bar association that I have to answer to, but I felt the same. I thought, boy, this attorney's taking quite the risk with his client, who has, as Alicia had pointed out, she's seen the actual NDA agreement. It was as an exhibit to the complaint that was just filed this week, and I thought, man, I'm not sure I'd want my attorney keep pushing this button and keep me talking about this and keep it, being in the news if I stand the risk of being charged $1 million in liquidated damages every time that I discuss it. Now, granted, he's discussing it and she's only discussed it the one time, or at least that we know of, she's only openly discussed it the one time with Anderson Cooper. But 130,000. If she loses this case, she's $870,000 in the hole for that one offense or one breach.
Yes, and the lawyer for William Cohen, his name escapes me, but he was on CNN the other night when things got a little bit out of hand, I guess. But and I was a little bit ashamed of our profession at that moment, but I do understand the emotions. There is some breaking news, as we said earlier, and this is from a couple hours ago, and I'm going to have to read it. Judge denies motion. The California judge, federal court judge, his name's S. James Otero, and he has denied Stormy Daniels' motion basically to depose President Donald Trump and to depose his longtime lawyer, William Cohen. So right now, the players in this game are, on one side, the plaintiff, it's Stormy Daniels and her attorney, Michael Avenatti. And then the other side, it's President Trump and William Cohen. As I said, we don't know exactly who's going to be President Trump's legal team at this point. But when motions like this are filed, we're going to start to hear from a few people. So that's the breaking news. Basically, Michael Avenatti's attorney was wanting to speed up this case, and although
that was Stormy Daniels' attorney, right, Daryl? Stormy's attorney.
Stormy's. Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There was one lawsuit over the non-disclosure agreement, and then Monday of this week, Stormy's lawyer filed another lawsuit for defamation. And so, I guess maybe the question I would ask you guys is very interesting legal question is, do you think, Alicia, that maybe the judge out in California will merge the two cases since they share essentially the same facts?
That I don't know, because there's a couple of things with regard to the non-disclosure agreement that I think is kind of coming up, and one is where it should be heard. So whether it should be done by arbitration, which is what Mr. Cohen was seeking, was that it should be heard in arbitration and not in a public court. And then there's the issue of whether or not the NDA is even a binding actual contract, because Mr. Trump did not sign it. So the only parties to have signed it or initialed it are Peggy Peterson, which we know is Stormy Daniels, yes. And Efficient Consultants, which was signed, an organization that was created a few days before it was signed and effectuated, I think, by Mr. Cohen. So there's nothing that's signed by Mr. Trump. So the question is whether or not it's a binding agreement. Now, there is case law that says that an agreement, a contract, can be found to be binding where parties start to act in furtherance of it and rely on it. So it's possible that it can still be found to be a binding contract. But some of the things that Mr. Cohen has said lately about whether or not Trump knew anything about this and that he was acting on his own kind of calls into play whether or not it really is a binding contract. So I think the first thing is whether or not there's that, and then that kind of opens up Stephanie Clifford or Stormy Daniels to be able to talk more about, yeah, going back between all the names,
Yeah.
open her to be able to talk more about a lot of the other issues surrounding the defamation, surrounding the claims that she's made too. So I don't know, it's very interesting. I don't know that they'll be bound together because I think that they have separate issues that need to be kind of taken apart. I don't think that they'll be held together. I don't think they'll be pressed together.
Yeah. Nick, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah,
Possibly merging the two.
it's interesting because really the second case, they'll be trying the case within the case, right? The NDA or the NDA agreement will be the case within the case. So in the defamation, that will be the case within the defamation case. So that'll be interesting to see whether or not they decide to keep them separate or keep them together. I think Alicia had just touched on something that's really interesting as far as the NDA goes. And I was doing some research ahead of time, and it looks like David Schwartz might be the attorney for Michael Cohen, and he has argued that it was signed that the NDA was signed by Stormy Daniels and also signed by Michael Cohen as the owner of Essential Consulting LLC, and evidently in the contract, and I just looked at it briefly, but he's arguing that it was David Dennison, which was Trump's alias, and or Michael Cohen or whatever his alias may have been in that. So their argument is that she had the agreement with Michael Cohen, and it could have been with Donald Trump or with Michael Cohen, but it didn't necessarily. So it really gets down to how will they interpret that or it could get down to that, which I think is really interesting. Feel like, and look, the civil procedure stuff has been a long time for me, but I feel like they could put these two together because you really need to have the answers to the NDA breach of contract for certain aspects of the defamation case. Yeah. And I guess the defamation really, whether or not they called her a liar is what the defamation comes down to. That really can go on beyond whether or not this breach of contract case continues. But I think it'll be interesting to see what the development is there and whether or not I feel like they could be together because the facts are so similar. But again, the actual defamation occurred later on when they essentially called Stormy a liar in so many words in a couple of statements. So the facts of that case are a little bit different. So
yeah, and it's like one action led to the other.
Yeah, one action led to the other. I think it's a great way to say it.
Well, yeah, that'll be interesting. And so to tell you a little bit about the non-disclosure agreement, what happened, and I'm sure you all heard this now, and it's a little hard to talk about for myself, but President Donald Trump was accused of having sex with a adult porn star back in either 2006, 2007, and about 11 days before last year's election, October 28th, Michael Cohen generated a contract and was signed by both Stormy Daniels and her lawyer. And on Trump's end, it was just signed by Michael Cohen. And as Nick alluded to, within the contract, it said Michael Cohen and or Donald Trump. So the defense in this case is saying basically this was a valid contract and there's liquidated damages if she talks, which now she has. And the plaintiff, Michael Avenatti and Stormy Daniels, are saying he didn't sign it, we had no contract, and thus we can talk about it. So I guess maybe our next question, and Alicia, I'll go ahead and throw this to you, is what do you think about the and or provision? And if you were a lawyer taking this case, which side would you fall on? Is it a contract or isn't it a contract?
I have to look at the contract, first of all, a little bit more closely because I don't recall seeing the and or portion of that. I'm sure that I will hope that if an attorney is arguing it, like Mr. Schwartz, that it exists there, and it's just something I missed in a few minutes before this review that we're doing. But I think that if I'm looking at if it is indeed an and/or situation, I think that it leads to it being more of a valid contract. And
Hmm.
I would be more concerned about discussing things the way that they are, especially since Miss Daniels took the money and at some point operated under that being a legally binding contract. It was signed, it was notarized, the sideline agreement that is attached to it was signed, was notarized, and submitted. And then there was also, I think, an additional something that she signed saying that or said that she never had a relationship with him, I think earlier this year. Kind of
Correct.
aligned, yeah, along with
More
that.
than one time.
Exactly. So I think that I would, be of concern. But, just reading the contract, looking at how many things that she had to do, that she had to turn over documents to Mr. Dennison, and that there were places for Dennison to sign or initial on every page, and all of them were done by efficient consultants. It just makes me a little bit concerned. I mean, as a lawyer, we can argue cases both ways, and that's kind of the
Sure.
way that we're taught. But just seeing that there is nothing signed by Mr. Trump anywhere, and again, given that Mr. Cohen has said that I've been doing all of this out of my own pocket, I didn't ask for a reimbursement. There's nothing signed by Mr. Trump anywhere. Just I think that actually leads to it actually being more of an invalid contract.
Yeah, and I guess I'm not sure if mentioned this. It was a $130,000 payment to which Stormy Daniels did receive, and actually had a different attorney at the time than the one she does now. And I guess Mr. Cohen's defense was, I was protecting the president. He's more than a client. The $130,000 came out of my pocket because I take care of my friends. And I do think on top of that, we should mention that it was taken out of a home equity loan, the cash that he paid. So I guess where we're kind of going with that is it's a campaign violation, basically, because it's too much from any one single donor if it came out of Cohen's pocket and he wasn't reimbursed. If we should find out that Donald Trump reimbursed him, then I think it's more going to be on it's going to more be on the up and up. But
I
then
think
that's going to change their whole narrative.
it
Yeah, it'll
will.
change
And
their
part
narrative.
of what they've also said is that the emails that were sent regarding this came from Trump Organization emails,
Yeah.
and that the agreement was sent back FedEx to Mr. Cohen at Trump Organization at Trump Tower.
Yes. Yes.
So, and then, the timeline is what it is. It's hard to kind of say that it's something else. It really is kind of difficult to say that it's something else.
And oh
Yeah,
my
yeah.
gosh, have we heard all about emails from private servers, from government servers. Nick, I didn't mean to
I
cut you off there.
I know. I think these are great points. That really the timing of it tells tells the story that people in who are watching the news, and you're getting a good idea of why this all happened, regardless of what the contract is, right? We got some people we really kind of need to stay quiet about this. How do we do that? Uh, Now,
Hush
granted,
money.
right,
Hush
hush
money.
money. I mean, you get the idea that that's what happened. In doing that, there's some right ways to do it and some wrong ways to do it, right? So if Cohen went and decided I'm going to protect my friend and I'm going to pay this money out of my own pocket, all right, if that's what they did and consideration was paid and she's now talking about it, then she probably breached the contract. But it makes it really hard to believe based on the dates that it all took place. So had this taken place, I'm trying to keep it from my wife, which he was married at the time when this took
Correct.
place, then you could, all right, well, this probably is unrelated to campaign. But, and the date that it took place, it's hard to say that it was unrelated and that they weren't trying to keep this quiet. And they probably could have done it better if they really wanted to keep it quiet. Um, so there's also value for her to have and this raises her image, and she did very well in her interview. She was very believable, and there may be value in her. It is her value of discussing this more than once. Does that outweigh the cost of paying paying the money back plus $1 million for the damages.
Yeah. And I think it's very interesting that her defense is number one, and I think this is very important point. She is not claiming to be a victim. She
Nope.
says, I am not a part of the Me Too movement because if I were to say that, I would take away from the people who really have legitimate Me Too arguments.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing is she's saying that she's not, and I agree with Nick that she sounded believable. What didn't sound so believable to me is she's saying she's not after any money. And she's saying, or any damages, which are pretty much, a civil law word for money.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to note that she says she just wants to clear her name. She wants to get the truth out there. And so then I guess it wasn't very surprising to any of us that she came back with a defamation case on Monday of this week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I
Alicia?
think that we talk about the timing too. So I was looking at that again because it's been a while. So the affair or whatever occurred in 06, 07. And then kind of looking at the timeline and everything, it was right around the time the Access Hollywood videotape audio came out. And then it was a few days later. So she came out after that. And I think that would have definitely been, it could have been really harmful to his campaign, to his election, if she said some of the things that she said, kind of like piling on.
Sure.
The dominoes kept falling,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah. I think and that's what they were looking at, because you look at it, it's 10 years later. It's a consensual relationship. How much would you really care it is what it is, but how much would you really care? I think that you do have to look at it in terms of what the timeline was. And I'm glad that she said that she's not a victim, because she's not. And I think, again, that does lend to her credibility. And just like you said, Daryl, I don't think it's about clearing the air. It may be part of that now, but I'm sure that there's a lot of value in what she has to say, and people are willing to pay her for it at this point. And that's why you're trying to make sure you're out of this NDA agreement, so you don't have to worry about being able to speak about it. And defamation is the best way to kind of get those things open. We saw that, I think, with Bill Cosby, where that was an issue, where once you say that someone's a liar, it opens the floodgates for people to be able to bring you to court and talk about all of those things that you couldn't talk about under the NDA, because the best argument or best defense is truth. So that's kind of where you want. So if you can get out there and you can get talking about it and get them to respond and say something like it's not true, all of a sudden now you have this ability to bring this other cause of action, which opens up and kind of almost negates the NDA.
Right.
Sure. It's kind of like their second stab at the apple, so to speak, because they're denying on the fact they're denying that there was a contract based on the fact that the president didn't sign it, and then bringing the 1-2 punch with the defamation. And we all know in a defamation suit that the defense to defamation is the truth.
Right.
And so, and I find it very, very strange that anyone who normally attacks the president, he responds quickly, and he responds on Twitter, and yet we've heard nothing from him on this issue.
I think this is one of those things that it's a losing battle for him.
It is.
Much of his bravado that he had, for many years, had been about all the women and that he's been with, and I think a lot of times he'd go on the Howard Stern show and discuss that. In the Me Too era, you can't really fight this type of an accusation with that type of bravado, right? So keeping your mouth shut about this is really the best he can do in this situation. But I do think that her Stormy Daniels or Stephanie Clifford's mentioning that it was totally consensual, this really added to her credibility for me. It was consensual, and I'm not a victim. I thought that she made that clear, and I feel like Michael Avenatti probably told her, you need to make that clear, because this is a separate issue from the Me Too movement, in which he may have had in mind that could somehow backfire against her if that were the claim that she had, that she needed to be upfront about that. I'm not saying that there anything lurid took place other than the adultery, right?
Yeah.
Anything other than that.
Well, and like we said earlier at the start of the show, an aggressive plaintiff's attorney using every means possible to publicize this, to put more pressure on the president and his team to basically, settle this case for a dollar amount. And I guess that kind of comes to the next issue. What could something like this be worth? And I guess one that really, really kind of haunts me is this going to be a confidential settlement, or is this going to be, are we all going to know about it? Because I think those talks are going to have to take place soon, or else, the president's going to have to give a deposition. I don't really think there's any, and I think the judge spoke to that today when he struck down the request from Stormy Daniels' attorney to take Donald Trump and Cohen's deposition, and he said, no, not yet.
Right.
So,
and if you don't mind, Alicia, we should note in this, just for historical purposes, we've seen this before with Bill Clinton, and he was forced to take a deposition because the judges said that the president was not exempt from civil state laws, and he was forced to take a deposition. He was forced to tell the truth in that deposition. And as I recall, he also had to pay fairly significant damages. I can't remember if that was I think that was to of his Paula
Jones?
Yeah. Paula Jones. That's who he had, and it's several $100,000 in damages in that case, I believe. So there is precedent for this.
Exactly. That is the precedent for it. That's why we're here. I mean, basically, is that's the precedent, and that's why the other defamation case is going forward. I forget her name, but there's another defamation case going forward involving
Zervos. Yeah, last name was Zervos.
Is that the Playmate?
She was on The Apprentice, I believe.
Okay.
She accused him of assault. He said, lies, and then she sued for defamation because she said, no, this did happen. I'm not lying. So there's a second defamation case going on. But the damages, this is where an expert witness would probably come in.
Sure.
And I was thinking that there's a couple of economist issues that would come up here. For me, the interesting point would be the economist on the defense side would say, look, it's 1 million times each time it's talked about, and they're probably going to try and rack up several times that it was talked about, not just the CNN interview, but they may claim any replays on that, right, somehow constitute more than one publication of it. The defense will say that, and they'll probably also argue that, look, her sales of her DVDs or sales of subscriptions to her website or whatever have gone up, so she has not actually been financially injured. That's where a big part of the...
She said in the interview, in fact, that she's gotten more offers because of this. So, I don't know how well she was prepped for the answer to that question, but...
which would lead me to believe that this may become then a false light, where it's not necessarily the financial damage, but this is a false light. You've placed her in the position of having to defend her truth and honesty or her veracity.
Yes, which means a lot in a civil trial.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I tell you
Alicia, what are your thoughts on that? I sort of jumped in on that.
No, I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. And I was going to say the same thing, that, interest in her has gone up. I mean, and she stated as much. People are watching, figuring out who she is, going and checking things out for themselves, and that helps her to a certain extent. But, at some certain point, that will die down. And then she'll have to deal with what's left. And I think that's where the economists can kind of come in and help out with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But again, her lawyer, Michael Avenatti, has done a heck of a job of keeping this news relevant day after day. Both before and he's worked his tail off getting, because he's on the Today Show at the crack of dawn and CNN at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and so he's done a good job of publicizing this. And like we said earlier, it's just to try to pressure the other side into some sort of a settlement.
Yeah, and he's teased out things on Twitter. He takes a picture of a CD-ROM sitting in his safe, right, indicating that do we or don't we have. Now, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, if you don't have anything, is this some violation of your professional responsibility, kind of? But he didn't say anything about what it is. He takes a picture.
And her answer in the interview was, the question was, do you have any text, emails, pictures, videotapes, anything like that? And she simply said, my attorney instructed me not to answer that question.
Well, part of the NDA said that she was supposed to turn over all copies of everything. So, but of course, does that ever really ever happen? And can you really ever get rid of all of something?
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, that is the other part of it. Is that my question? I read that was like, well, what did she have, and what was turned over, and who received it? Was it Mr. Cohen through Efficient Consultants, or did Mr. Trump get it? And then the other thing was looking at the agreement. So going back to who signed it and when, I wonder. So they both signed it. I wonder if there is another signed agreement somewhere where Mr. Trump did sign it, and it's just sitting somewhere else and just wasn't turned over. Because the agreement allows for the agreement to be signed in counterparts, and then for that last one to exist somewhere else. So there's always a possibility of that, but I think that it would have surfaced, and potentially would have surfaced with regard to the arbitration proceeding, where they were able to get a stay, but that was done without the other party being there. So I just wonder whether there was another one that was signed somewhere and just not turned over in an effort to protect Mr. Trump from there actually being some signed agreement. Because right now, you look at the complaint, you see everything. Even her attorney's bank routing number and everything is there. Like nothing was really particularly redacted in the complaint and the agreements, except for Mr. Trump's real name. So
interesting. Yeah. It's gonna get more interesting before it ever quiets down, I think.
Sure. And want to keep an eye on our time here, and I think it's probably time we better start wrapping up. Just tell everybody we're not auditioning for spots on CNN and Fox News and MSNBC because we haven't really taken a position. We just kind of, as lawyers do, we pointed out both sides. I'm not particularly rooting for either side. I just think it's very interesting. And so with all that said, we're going to go around the horn maybe one last time, and we'll start with Alicia. And what do you think's going to happen? We're not going to hold you to this certainly, but what do you think?
Going to look back at it and see how right or wrong I was. For me, it's just really interesting. Kind of just sitting down, talking about contracts, poking holes, kind of doing the law school examination type thing with these agreements is always it's a fun exercise, I think, as for us as attorneys. I don't really know. I could really see it going either way, so I hesitate to say one way or the other. But I feel that if I had to lean one way, I could see that the NDA might be upheld. I think that there was significant performance on her behalf, I think that there's a possibility that it just might be. Now, the defamation might be a totally different thing. When all of it's said and done, I'm really concerned for Mr. Cohen and what he's done as an attorney representing his client. I think he should be really concerned about his status as an attorney going forward.
Mm-hmm. Great insight. Nick?
Yeah, I think on the NDA, I could see this, and I'll quote my dad here when he said, he told me when I was in law school that you'll never know what a judge is going to do when they put the black robe on. So you just never know. Somebody could rule, oh yeah, no, this is going forward, and there's clearly this held up. I don't know if they're going to do a bench trial or a jury trial or what, but if it's a bench trial, you really have no idea. And but I personally, reading what I've read so far, I feel like the NDA could, she did accept the money. There was a substantial performance. The consideration was paid. I'm thinking from a strict contracts in performance issue from the contract. I'm thinking, she's violating. She breached. But again, you may settle one in order to settle the other, right?
Yes.
If we're going to negotiate, and I think they probably have a legitimate case on defamation, and we'll see where that goes. Anyway, this has been fun. I agree. This is I had to do some preparation because it's a long time since I really had to exercise the law school skills.
Well, you did great. So, I think I'm gonna kind of give the patented same answer as you guys, and I do agree with y'all. If this was simply legal, I think there probably was, like you said, substantial compliance with the terms of the contract, and or to me, now the law could be a little different in California, but and or for me means one guy can sign it, or both of them can sign it. Mm-hmm. And now I question Mr. Cohen's. I guess the thing I would question about him, besides some of his defamatory remarks, is why didn't he just have a place for him to sign and not the president? And then the other thing you got to understand is 11 days before the election, who knows where the president was at that time? Mm-hmm. And so it could have been a logistical issue. On the other hand, I really think the plaintiff's attorney has done a good job turning up the heat on the president. So here's what I'm going to predict. In order for Trump to win, this has got to go to a jury trial, or as Nick alluded, possibly a bench trial. But I think it would be a jury trial, knowing Michael Avenatti. He'll ask for one. But I think that by him turning up the pressure, that there will be a meeting of the minds at some point, and there will be a settlement. And I'm going to go a step further. I think, sadly, it's going to be a confidential settlement. Mm-hmm. And I think everything other than what's been shared is going to. And I think it's a real quagmire for the president, because there are other claims out there. And I think you'll remember back to when he campaigned, he says, the reason I don't settle lawsuits is because it makes you basically a moving target. It mm-hmm. invites, one lawsuit settled invites another lawsuit against someone like him with a net worth in the billions. So yeah, I think that's going to happen. I think it is a contract, though. I think it'll settle confidential terms. And one thing's for sure, we'll follow up on this, and maybe we'll get back together at the end of it and go back through this. But I really want to thank you guys a lot on short notice coming on, and we'll get this up and send you guys copies. And hey, hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Sounds good. I'd love to.
Yes,
all right. Thanks so much, Nick. Thanks so much, Alicia.
Thank you.
Daily Daryl out.